One of my favorite stories in your book took place in your high school class in Waterloo, Iowa, with your teacher, Ray Dial, when you discovered the year 1619.
I grew up in Waterloo, Iowa. Yes, there are black people in Iowa. Yes, most of us are related. But I grew up in a town that didn't have a huge black population, but it still had enough black people to segregate us. And so starting in the second grade, my parents enrolled me in a voluntary school desegregation program where black parents could opt to bus their kids out of their neighborhoods into white neighborhoods and white neighborhood schools. And so that's what my parents did. And starting in the second grade all the way until 12th grade, I was bused out of my neighborhood into white schools. And my high school offered a one-semester Black Studies elective course called From the African American Experience, and it was taught by this educator named Mr. Ray Dow. If you have read the preface to the book, then you know I shout out Mr. Dow by name. Mr. Dow was just this amazing educator. He actually was a college professor. He taught college-level Black Studies. And as you can imagine, in our high school, all of the black kids were bused in to a school that wasn't ours. And so we were often made to remember that this school did not belong to us. There were lots of racial tensions at my high school. So the administration had recruited Mr. Dow to be a disciplinarian to us wayward black kids, right? They brought him in to get us together, but they didn't know they were importing the enemy, right? So Mr. Dow was one of those radical black educators who, instead of trying to control us, he sought to liberate us. And he taught this class on Black Studies, and he taught it at a college level because that's what he did. And when me and my friends decided to start this covert underground black newspaper, he was the teacher who would let us into the teacher's lounge after hours so we could print our paper. And when we led walkouts at the school because we were demanding better treatment and we believed that Black Studies should be a year-long course and that it shouldn't be an elective, that you shouldn't be able to elect into learning our history, he's the one who told us exactly how far we could go up to the line without getting expelled. And so he was the only black male educator I ever had, and in this class, you know, I often think about my favorite movie is Malcolm X, and I think about that moment when Malcolm X is in the jail cell, and Elijah Muhammad comes to him on a vision, right? It's like a ray of light that comes into the cell, and he's transformed. His world is never the same, and that's what Mr. Dow's class did for me. So all of a sudden, in this 3 months, I'm learning more about black people in America and the globe than I'd learned my entire life. And it was in that class that I realized there's actually things you can learn about black people, right? Because what I think we don't understand, it is the known world. For a child, what you know about your world is what adults have taught you, or what you have gathered from television or movies or museums. And black people really didn't exist in that world, except we were enslaved, and then Abraham Lincoln freed us, and then 100 years later, Dr. King gives a speech, and that's it, right? That's the whole story. And so you tend to then think the reason they're not teaching you anything about black people is we must not have done that much worthy of teaching us about. And then here I am in this class. I know it's a long answer.
Good, I love it.
He's going to get through 3 questions on that list. So here I'm in this class, and all of a sudden, I'm being exposed to this whole world of knowledge that no one ever thought it was important enough for us to know. So being the nerdy child I was, I started asking Mr. Dow to give me books to read on my own outside of class. Like, this one class was not enough. And one of the books he gave me was a book called Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett. And I took it home, and I'm reading it at my dining room table, and like 30 pages in, I come across the date 1619. And I didn't know when I got the book what the title was evoking, which was saying, I thought Before the Mayflower was talking about African history before we got to the United States. But on page 30 or so, he talks about this ship called the White Lion that lands in Virginia a year before the Mayflower lands at Plymouth Rock. And I was astounded, right, that we know every American child learns about the Mayflower. And yet no one had ever taught us about the White Lion that arrived a year earlier, that I would argue had much more of an impact on the country that would be built. And so I realized at 15 years old, one, like the powerful symbolism of that date, of a lineage, of a Black African lineage that went all the way back to the earliest days of the original colony, but also to the power of erasure. Because then I understood at 15, it wasn't that there wasn't knowledge to be had. It was that people had chosen not to teach us these things. So what else hadn't they taught us? So I became both really empowered to know there was all this knowledge that there were books, that there was knowledge, that there were contributions, but also really angry that I had spent most of my life feeling diminished, demeaned, erased, that maybe we were inferior people in some ways because we didn't seem to have much of a history or much contributions, and that had all been intentional. And then I understood why, because I became a completely incorrigible student after that, right? So you realize, oh, they don't teach you this, because then you start to challenge. So I would go in my other courses and I challenge, like, why do we only get to read one Black poet in my AP English course? Well, why aren't you talking about this in my social studies course? And it was just that one teacher who planted that seed and just showed me that there was a lineage to be known. So I've been obsessed with 1619. I mean, it was maybe 5 years ago that I was in high school. Are y'all just gonna disrespect me and laugh like that? Okay, I got you. But so for 30 years, for 30 years, I've really been obsessed with the date 1619, both for just the facts of it, that there was this history that had been erased, but also just the powerful symbolism of a people whose legacy outdates nearly everyone else who's here.